everyone, John here. So normally I focus mostly on retelling certain myths in my own comedic way, just for the sake of informative entertainment, and because it's fun for me. But today I'm gonna take a sharp left turn and cover something a bit more serious, specifically the normalization of rape culture.
See this button? Don't touch it!
It's the societal hot button, you fool! Now, rape culture is defined as a society or environment whose prevailing social attitudes have the effect of normalizing or trivializing sexual assault and abuse. This can include all kinds of things: sexual objectification, exploitation, slut-shaming, blaming the victim, etc. But for this video, I wanted to focus primarily on blaming the victim and how pervasive it is even in ancient mythology. This brings us to Medusa. Poor Medusa. What many of you probably know is that Medusa was the snake-haired woman that Perseus killed so he could use her head to turn the crack into stone and save Princess Andromeda in Clash of the Titans. What some of you may not know is that she wasn't always that way. No. Medusa began her life in a far less serpentine condition. You see, Medusa was the daughter of Phorcys, a primordial god, spiky crab merman gone wrong thing, and Cato, his much more human-looking wife, who's also a goddess in her own right, being the daughter of Gaia. Now, Greek mythological lineage can be a bit of an infinite regress if you're not careful, or a Pandora's box if you will, so moving forward, back to Medusa. Now, Medusa became the high priestess of the Temple of Athena, and as such had sworn to remain a virgin. This was a problem because she was super hot and everyone wanted her. Of course! At this point, Cervantes would probably say that just because someone is attracted to her doesn't mean she's under any obligation to reciprocate, but writing tropes can be culturally illuminating in a getting in their heads kind of way, so moving on. So one day the god Poseidon shows up to lay his mac down. Medusa's not interested, so he forces himself on her right on Athena's altar. How do you suppose Athena will react? Will she support Medusa and vow vengeance against her uncle Poseidon? Let's take a look.
Have you forgotten your vows?
Yeah, no, she blames Medusa and transforms her into a monster whose gaze turns men to stone. Now, I've heard it spun in such a way as to imply that Athena was arming Medusa against further unwanted attention, but I call bullshit because the next time we hear from Medusa, she's being murdered by Perseus so he can weaponize her powers of petrification for himself. To accomplish this, he uses a mirrored shield, which was gifted to him by, you guessed it, Athena herself. So yeah, if this was a protection spell, it backfired to the nth degree. As an aside, I do appreciate the allegory of sexual assault turning a character into a monster, at least on an intellectual level, since it bespeaks of the internal struggle of the victim during the aftermath. But it's like the ancient Greeks took the idea and ran with it in completely the wrong direction, or rather, Ovid sure as Hades did. Now, I'm a proponent of the idea that stories are a window into the minds of the people who wrote them, and there are some disturbing implications here. The fact that Medusa gets blamed for her own sexual assault at the hands of a god shows that blaming the victim was probably common practice in ancient Greece, and moreover, having Athena, a badass warrior goddess, participate in it only reinforces the point. Apparently, Athena had her own issues with internalized misogyny. So we see the blame the victim mentality goes way back in the history of human mythology, and to me suggests that this reaction is pretty deeply ingrained in societal attitudes. There are a ton of other examples from Greek mythology I should probably mention here. Arachne comes readily to mind, as does Cassandra. Hell, Hera is an excellent example of internalized misogyny and a powerful female character causing her to exact revenge on human women and their offspring rather than confronting her habitually adulterous husband. But I feel like Cassandra, Arachne, and Hera all deserve their own episodes so I can attempt to do their stories justice. There's a lot to unpack here, and the more I think about it, the more it seems like a whole series of videos is warranted. So getting back to Medusa, we fast forward a bit, and the societal attitude toward her evolves. By 1940, Freud's Das Medusenhaupt was published posthumously. In Freud's interpretation, to decapitate equals to castrate. The terror of Medusa is thus a terror of castration that is linked to the sight of something. Numerous analyses have made us familiar with the occasion for this. It occurs when a boy, who has hitherto been unwilling to believe the threat of castration, catches sight of the female genitals, possibly those of an adult, surrounded by hair, and essentially those of his mother. Of course, in Freud's case, modern psychologists would probably call that projection, but I digress. By the 1970s, feminists reassessed Medusa's appearance in literature and in modern culture. Medusa becomes something of a patron saint of sorts, her image a symbol of female rage. One of the first publications to express this idea was the feminist journal Women, a Journal of Liberation, in issue 1, volume 6 for 1978. The cover featured the image of Medusa by Froggy Lupton, which the editors on the inside of the cover explained, can be a map to guide us through our terrors, through the depths of our anger, into the source of our power as women. In issue 3, fall 1986, for the magazine Woman of Power, an article called Gorgons, the Face for Contemporary Women's Rage, appeared, written by Emily Irwin Culpepper, who wrote that the Amazon Gorgon face is the female fury personified. The Gorgon Medusa image has been rapidly adopted by a large number of feminists who recognize her as one face of our own rage. This naturally clicks with the notion of rape culture, which was also coming into public eye at the time. The notion of rape culture was developed by second-wave feminists, primarily in the United States, beginning in the 1970s, and was applied to contemporary American culture as a whole. The first published use of the term appears to have been in 1974 in Rape, the First Source Book for Women by Noreen Connell and Cassandra Wilson. In the intervening decades, and especially the last few years, the subject has broadened and, thanks to the advent of social media, become a major hot-button issue that is much more openly discussed than it once was. This is the point at which I could go on a bit of a rant about my own position on the topic, but in an effort to stay focused and make my point succinctly, I'll just say that I do think that a society or environment whose prevailing social attitudes have the effect of normalizing or trivializing sexual assault and abuse does in fact describe the situation in the, air quotes, United States and abroad. Heck, just look at some of these contemporary depictions and how incredibly sexualized they are, and you'll probably see what I'm getting at. So by now some of you may be asking, what's his point? Nobody believes Greek mythology is literally true, so why bring it up? In answer, I want to jump back in time about 2,000 years. Remember how I said that the stories we tell can reveal the mindset of the people who tell them? Well, let's look in on 1st century Judea, where we have the story of the Virgin Mary conceiving Jesus, a story revered by a large portion of the human population as literally true and a beautiful story. But take a step back and we see the story of a girl in her early teens being forcibly impregnated by, air quotes, God. Contextually speaking, God has total power over her, and she's too young to give consent. Mary being cool with it in the story is irrelevant because her age and societal conditioning invalidate the idea of informed consent coming from her, especially since her perpetrator is supposedly all-powerful. This is a story people do believe in, and tell their children. They spin it in a positive light when it is, in fact, horrific. So to sum up, my basic point is, if we really want to combat rape culture, we need to acknowledge and address the fact that for the last 2,000 years, a large swath of mankind has been exulting and promulgating a story about a teenage girl being sexually assaulted by the creator of the universe. And that is not at all okay. And thus I bring my presentation to an abrupt close because it's kind of irritating me just talking about it. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and feel free to let me know what subjects you'd like me to tackle in the future. And as always, thanks for tuning in. I'm John Hammond, and this has been According to John. Doom not the poor, doom not the peaceful, doom not the meek, doom not the merciful, for the word is now death, and the word is now without light, the new beatitude. Fuck the new, you're on your own.